We want to welcome everybody for being with us today. I'm Laura Cutler, the Managing Director of the Center for Israel Studies at American University. I'm here with my colleague, Professor Michael Brenner, the Director of the Center for Israel Studies, and we're excited to welcome you for our first program this semester, which will be one of many. The program is Being Black in Israel Today. It's a very timely topic, and we are delighted to welcome an old friend, Pnina Agenyahu, back. Many of you may know her. She was the shlicha at the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington for several years and actually has spoken before, and I know that she is always a role model for the Ethiopian-Israeli community, and maybe she'll talk about how that feels. And we have with her Ashager Araro. Ashager's name means going forward in Amharic, and many of our attendees today will be excited to hear from her. She is the same age of many of our students, and framing our conversation will be Uri Dorchin, and Michael will do a fuller introduction. He's a scholar of race and especially in what it means to be Black in Israel. So I want to just let you know a couple housekeeping items. You can actually enable captions for this event live if you hit the closed caption button on the bottom of your screen. We have a transcriber, and we always endeavor to be accessible to everyone who wants to participate in our programs. We are recording this session, and we will make the link available to you to watch at a later date. And we are going to have a period of time for questions as we continue, and you think of questions as people are talking. Please put them in the Q&A. You'll see at the bottom of your screen there's a Q&A. If you have other things you want to ask, particularly myself and our technical assistant Eric Gordon today, please put your questions to us in that regard in the chat, but we'll try and use the Q&A for questions. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Michael Brenner, and thank you so much, all of you, for being here.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you especially to Israel, to our three panelists today. Our topic is Being Black in Israel. Of course, a very timely topic. There was a lot of talk about Black Lives Matter in this country, and I thought it would be, nothing could be more appropriate than opening our semester with an event of discussing what that actually means in the Israeli context, which is, of course, a little different than the US. With us, and I will introduce you briefly in the order of your opening statements. Uri Dorchin is an Israeli anthropologist. His study is focused on the meanings of Blackness in Israel, especially in the context of popular culture. Uri previously taught at the Academic College in Tzfat at UCLA, and currently he's a visiting scholar at the Program for Jewish Studies in University of Colorado, Boulder, although he does join us from Israel today. He is the author of a book on hip hop in Israel, and he is also the co-editor of the forthcoming book, Blackness in Israel, Rethinking Racial Boundaries. Welcome, Uri, and welcome Ashager. Ashager Araro is the Ethiopian-Israeli founder of Bete, an Ethiopian heritage center in the heart of Tel Aviv. At the center, which she runs together with her aunt, they introduce visitors from Israel and all over the world to the joy of Ethiopian culture through food, dance, and art. Araro was born in Ethiopia in 1991, and as her family walked from their village to the capital, Addis Ababa, where they were picked up by the Israeli military as part of Operation Solomon and airlifted to Israel. She describes herself as a storyteller. Pnina, welcome back, Pnina. I remember very much when we had our wonderful event at the Ethiopian Embassy some years ago here in DC. Pnina Agenyahu is the Interfaces and Synergy Director at the Strategic and Planning Unit of the Jewish Agency. Pnina served as the Jewish Agency Senior Shlicha of the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington. She's an activist involved in several volunteer endeavors in Israel aimed at social change. In 2014, Pnina was named by Haaretz as one of 66 influential women you should know. So now you get to know her. And Pnina holds degrees from the Hebrew University and from Tel Aviv University. She also was born in Ethiopia and came to Israel as a child. So this is a really interesting group we have, and I don't want to waste a lot of time with me talking. Let me ask and start with Uri. Uri, your forthcoming book is about blackness in Israel. How is that different of being black in the United States? And which groups are we talking about? And tell us a little bit about what your research is on in this book.
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Michael and Laura, for your invitation. I'm happy to participate in this wonderful event. And I'd like to start by emphasizing that the book and my work, generally speaking, is focused on blackness and not on black people necessarily. And the difference would be that blackness, although we might think that we all know what blackness means, I mean, it's seemed to be rather clear. For me as a scholar, blackness is first and foremost a notion, a theoretic concept, and not necessarily a physical property or a skin tone. To put it in different words, in other words, it is blackness is an abstract idea, and therefore my book is not a checklist of black populations or black communities in Israel, but blackness as more broadly as a phenomenon that does not necessarily connected or associated with skin tone or with African ancestry. Now, Pnina and Ashager will definitely will speak more closely about the meanings of being actually black person in Israel or being from an African background in Israel. But to understand blackness and the meaning of blackness in Israel more broadly, we must understand that the relevance of skin tone or color begins from a different space, culturally and geographically. Historically, Jews, while in the diaspora and during the end of the 19th century, we must remember that 75% of the Jewish population in the world were concentrated in Europe, mainly in Eastern Europe. These Jews were considered by their host societies as non-white. Okay, one way for the nations, the host nation, to designate or distinguish Jews as outsiders to the national communities, as ultimate others, or at least one of several groups considered as ultimate others. Second of all, something that we must remember when speaking about Israel, that Israeli society, the main line around which society is organized is not that separating whites from blacks as it would be in the United States, but rather between Jews and non-Jews. Now, the founding, I would say, the formative myth of the Zionist movement was that of ingathering all Jewish exiles in the state of Israel, and the fact that Jews, or being a Jew, stretch across ethnic background, across racial affiliation, across culture or geographical origin, strengthen and apparently affirm this mythos that Israel is a home to all Jewish people and secure independence to all Jewish people equally. Now, the gap between the official discourse and the myth and what actually happens in the streets, and the fact that there are power relation and discrimination and gaps between different Jewish communities, again, this is a fact, and I not intend to overlook it. And once again, Ashager and Pnina would I bet would be able to talk about this better than I do. But still, we must also remember that it is not only the official discourse offered by the establishment, but the common sense of the Israeli society is still one that speaks in terms of integration, of absorption, and mutual support, at least as far as it considered to the inner circle of the Jewish community. And there is a difference between Ethiopian Jew and Ethiopian person who is not a Jew and happened to find himself in Israel, or to that matter, Sudanese asylum seeker or Eritrean refugee. Okay, so, and I'm saying this not to hint that one's color or skin tone is not a factor, or it does not play a role. It does. But if we want to start and understand its meaning, or how it plays a role, what its significance, we must always try to understand this within a larger matrix of other dimensions and factors and aspects that is not less prominent than the color.
Thank you, Uri, setting the stage and from your own research. And I think it's important to turn to people inside the community, of course. And Ashager, you maybe you can tell us a few words about your own story, but also why is it important for you to keep up the Ethiopian Jewish traditions and culture in Israel, and how do you do it?
Thank you. As you said in my bio, I was born in Israel. I was born in Ethiopia, but I came to Israel when I was very young. I came when I was only 1 year old. And you will assume I'm all Israeli and I have no Ethiopian background or culture background, because I was born all my life, I've been in Israel. But the fact of the matter is that although I was born in Ethiopia and I came when I was very, very young, the household that I was growing up in was very, very Ethiopian. What do I mean by that? We spoke Amharic, which is the Ethiopian language. We ate Ethiopian food, listened to Ethiopian music. Everything culturally surrounding me was Ethiopian. I remember that my parents told me it was very hard for me to learn Hebrew, because when I went to the kindergarten, I refused to speak Hebrew. And the only reason I spoke Hebrew, like the teacher went to my father and said, listen, she see kindergarten as something that she need to be for 5-6 hours a day, and then she goes back home and everyone speak Amharic. So she doesn't need to learn this new language that everyone speaks. And the only time I learned how to speak Hebrew is when both of my parents sat down with me and learned Hebrew. Because then I saw my role models, my parents speaking the language that everyone else. Before that, everything around me was Amharic. So culturally, I grew up very Ethiopian, but once I went out of my household, once I grew up and went out of the surrounding of my family, close family, I was all Israeli. And I understood the Israeli culture, the atmosphere, the background. So I always grew up in some of two identities you can see, my Ethiopian side and my Israeli side. And my Ethiopian side is very proud of the culture and the heritage and the sacrifice they had to go through in order to bring us here. They have a lot of honor of the state of Israel, and them coming here. It's not just like one story, it's a dream for my grandma for her entire life. 60 years she was praying day in and day out, next year in Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem. This is where their life goal. This is the atmosphere I grew up in, like being thankful for what you have, understanding that the life that I'm living was given to me. It's not something that just like, I cannot take it for granted. And this is something that is very ingrained with who I am and what I do in my life. So from that point, I had this passion about telling the story of Ethiopian Jews. And why is that? Because a lot of time, I feel the story is not being told enough, and it doesn't get the respect that it deserves. And when it's been told, you only get one narrative. The narrative, the government helping the Ethiopian coming in. There isn't story of the people. There isn't story of the leadership that worked for tirelessly for years to keep this isolated Jewish community alive, keeping tradition. There isn't the story of the leaders that work with the Israeli government to convince them to bring Ethiopian Jews. It's always the one narrative of the government. And what I wanted to do is take this reclaim the narrative and tell the story of the people from their point of view. You said I define myself as a storyteller because throughout all my life, I saw how stories can make a difference, how they can break down barriers, how they can connect between people. And every time I approach different audience, no matter what is their opinion, once I tell my personal story, tell the story of my community, I can see they connect with me. And that's what I try to do with the center. We will continue to talk a little bit after, I believe, in what was the reasoning that I built the center, why right now, because the center was something that I believe that I will do 5-7 years from now. It was like a long dream. But through the events of the last year, my aunt and I have understood there isn't time to waste, and there has to be something to connect between people. And this is the idea of the center.
Yeah, we will maybe really come back in the second round to the events of last year because a lot is going on, especially in this community. I first will turn to Pnina. Pnina, you have been actually a little longer in Israel. You came with a little earlier movement, I believe. And maybe you can also tell us a little bit about other differences between those Ethiopian Jews who've been there earlier and later, and do you see also, having lived in the United States, how would you describe the differences of your life, in Israel versus the United States? I think that's something I'd be very interested to hear.
Okay. First of all, thank you for inviting me, and it's exciting to see you again and Laura. It's been like 3 years, I believe. So I came in 1984 in Moses Operation, which we were like one of the first families to land in Israel. And just to put, to set it up in your mind, just to imagine it, the vision to imagine, that's me that the first families that are Black Jews coming to Israel. It challenged the society around us, and it challenged us as well, by the way. I think a lot of what Ashager is trying to say about the narrative is that people in Israel, until today, by the way, doesn't necessarily understand that we lived in a community in Ethiopia, which was one concept of being a Jew. You were a biblical Jew. There wasn't a concept of to choose if you're secular, Orthodox, Reconstruction, Conservative, or Reform. You just was a Jew, traditional Jew based on the Bible. We never heard about the Oral Torah, everything that developed. That's meant that we never heard about white Jew as well, right? So for us, we were the original. We were keeping and watching the original Torah and Judaism, which meant that for us, it was a huge shock to come to Israel when mainly most of the people will, think about the struggle we passed through as a new immigrant, which is usually related to language, culture differences. I usually claim and say that doesn't really matter to our parents, because they're really grateful to come to Israel, reconnect with the Jewish people and be in a Jewish state, which they were dreaming about in a very innocent and a very pure way, very very simple, okay? But the things that they never took in mind and no one bothered to prepare them, before we came to Israel, especially our immigration, is to understand that, first of all, not everyone is Jewish in Israel. Second of all, that those that are Jewish in Israel are all white. We the minority. The majority is white. The third of all is even the Jews in Israel, which we were so happy to join them, which we took a big effort to make that happen. For my family, we walked for 14 days barefoot, and we end up waiting in a refugee camp in Sudan for 7 months until we had a permission to come to Israel. For us, it's worth all of it if we join the big Jewish family, which in the end of the day question our Jewishness, So I think those things no one took in mind in sharing with us, because there wasn't any time for it. It was an emergency operation. It was something that happened in the middle of the night. People left the houses. My mother left, her family, her parents, her 14 siblings, her husband, my dad, and she left with 2 little girls. I was 2.5 years old, and my older sister was 7 years old. Just imagine what kind of bravery and courage it takes for a young mother to leave everything behind, to go to a land that the only thing simply she's thinking about is everyone's going to be Jewish there. They were going to welcome us because we're Jewish people and we belong to the Jewish people. And that's it. I mean, and they were grateful for that. So no one prepared them to the big shock, which I call the big shock, not the low social economical, struggle and the language. I think the big shock is when they end up landing here, understanding that their Jewishness is being questioned, that the narrative not being told, including, what Ashager said before, the history, the background, the heritage we bring in with us. We had a full, impressive heritage and history as a people, as a community, and no one cared about it. I mean, the feeling was that we need to leave everything behind and just embrace a new identity as an Israelis. So this is like, just to summarize really, really shortly, kind of the experience for the first wave of immigration to Israel from Ethiopia. And then again, it's really important to say that in the 80s, no one even prepared the Israelis here. I don't say that we needed to prepare them, because any Aliyah was not preparing any New Orleans, but people was shocked to see Black people on the neighborhood. I mean, the neighborhood my family live until today in Haifa. Until today, we're the only Ethiopian family in a neighborhood of Holocaust survivors from Romania and Russian speaker Jews, and Arabs and Muslims. But none of them knew how to speak with us, how to, to communicate with us. The second operation, which one Ashager came with, in the Solomon operation, which we hope that the government will be more prepared. There was a lot of, change and more understanding of how we need to prepare this Aliyah. But again, it was an emergency Aliyah. In 36 hours, no one knew in Israel that they bring in Ethiopian Jews, because it was a secret operation operated by the government of Israel and the state and the United States and the Mossad. 36 hours, the state of Israel inflew to Israel 14,300 Ethiopian Jews, which is amazing. And I don't think historically in the Israeli history, there was done something like that. A lot of effort from the government side and a lot of effort from our brave, simple people. But again, no one prepared the ground, no one prepared them. And just imagine that this time, in flight of 4 hours, people that came from a village, from a third world country, needed to adjust automatically to a very progressive and modern life, like in Israel. And I think, as an adult today, looking backward, this is really a lot to, as you say in America, it's overwhelming. It's a lot. It's a lot for a new person that come in, not to talk about new immigrants that come from America or French and Russia, which is a bit similar word type. But people that came from the Jewish villages in Ethiopia, most of us came from a villages, not a big city. Most of us are agricultural people, working with their hands. 90% of the Ethiopian kids that came to Israel didn't have the opportunity to go to higher education, not to talk about elementary school or high school in Ethiopia. It was really a minor number of people that really reached to education in Ethiopia. So think about all this, all this set coming to Israel, it's a lot. And I feel like it took a lot of effort, not from our side as well, but also from the government, but it wasn't enough. It's not, you can't treat the same immigrant in the same equal set of tools. I mean, an immigrant that coming from Russia or America, it's not the same an immigrant that coming from Ethiopia. So giving an Ethiopian family 3 years in absorption center and accepting them after 3 years to get out of the absorption center and automatically find a job, an apartment, and integrate to the society, it's not equal. You can't do that. It's a different word, in my opinion. And I think only now lately, people in different institutions, the government understand that it's not the same set and we need to treat it differently. And answering your second part of the question about my experience in America, I will just share shortly. I will just give an example about color and about what Uri said before. When we lived in America for 4 years, somehow I didn't even notice that I look different. I didn't felt that people looking at me strange in the position I am, or staring at me on the street for the house I'm having or for the car I'm holding. And unfortunately in Israel, I many times feel that people do stare at me if they see me live where I live today, which is a city that it's not so integrated, Modi'in. And I feel like people stare at me and surprised when I tell them where I work or where I work before that, which it's kind of, I don't want to, it's not institutional racism, but it's kind of a more socially racism when people have assumption about where you can be and where you should be, right? So if people have assumption about a person with a skin color, a person of color, and they feel or think that all people of color, as Uri said, Jewish Ethiopian Jews and non-Jewish Ethiopian that live in Israel, supposed to be working as, I don't know, a cleaner, a guard, and kitchen, etc. So I feel embarrassed for our society if they're surprised to see me in a higher position. They shouldn't be surprised. If I grew up in Israel since I was 2 years old, I basically, live my entire life here. My mother tongue in the end of the day is more Hebrew than Amharic. That's what I use, right? So, or when I go to conventions or conferences and I speak, fluent Hebrew and fluent English, and many times I will see, generally the Israelis coming up to me to feedback me, and they will tell me, wow, you said you have such a beautiful Hebrew, how come? And I'm like, did anyone question your Hebrew? I mean, why are you questioning my Hebrew? Why the expectation is that I will have a low Hebrew? And I feel this is kind of like one of the biggest difference that I see. And one last example of it, it's also the kids. Now as a mother, my son was in a conservative synagogue school in America, in Washington, which he was the only Black kid there. No one ever questioned him about his skin color. None the teacher, not the staff, and not the kids. No one ever asked him why he's brown, why he's different. So it's like it's, that's the reality of America. You see Black people all over the place in different positions. When we came to Israel, we both asked ourselves, me and my husband, when's gonna be the first time that someone gonna ask our son why he's brown and why he's black? Because we know we end up living in Modi'in when our son gonna be again the only Black person in the entire school. And it's happened after 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, some Israeli kids came to him and asked him why he's brown, why he's different, why we brown, if this color get off or not. And I start talking with those kids and I told them, it's because he's my son and I'm brown and etc. and explaining. But what I was shocked to hear, it's the teacher of the school, when I asked her if they talk about diversity, if they educate about, being different, looking different in our society. And she told me something like, well, you need to understand them. It's a new thing for them to see a Black person. And then it's hit me. What do you mean it's a new thing for them? So there is places all over this country in Israel that many people, kids growing up without meeting an Ethiopian person or Black person in their life. And maybe the first time gonna be in army service or university. And it's embarrassing. I mean, it's 2020. And in Israel, there is around 150,000 Ethiopian Jews, and there is a big group of immigrants from Darfur, Sudan, and Ethiopia. And there is some kids growing up in Israel, never seen a Black person. They don't know to appreciate a Black person.
Thank you, Pnina. That was, I think, very enlightening in terms of both countries and also what Israeli society may still have to learn. Not exactly from the American example, because there are many problems here, but by itself. Ashager, let's go back to you for a moment, because you did mention last year was very decisive for you to start your project. Can you tell us a little bit more, and also how that project is working? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay. So as I said, the idea of the center was something that my aunt and I were dreaming about for a long time, and we imagined it happening, but we always said we need to build like the ground and understand like what we're going to do, and it's going to be a long process. And what happened last year was the murder of Salomon Taka. It's young Ethiopian, 18 years old, that was shot by an off-duty police officer. And it was a case that shocked Israel, the country itself, and the community particularly. And for me, it was very, very hard when I heard about what happened a day after. My aunt called me in the morning, and she said, like, she know we are very connected. That she always feel like the same atmosphere that I feel. She called me and she's like, "You want to go to the funeral?" And I said, "Yeah, I have to." So I decided not to go to work, and I drove like 2.5 hours to his funeral in order to pay respect to his family, his friends, to show them that we are with them. I didn't know him, but I felt connected to them. I connected to his story. And after being at the funeral, and what I saw there is you have people from all across Israel coming, different groups, different colors, different affiliation, coming and paying the respect and understanding. And I saw that everyone is seeing the problem. The problem is out there, and it's not from one group to another. You see different people understanding the conversation have to be done right now. And after being in the funeral, I drove back to Tel Aviv. And I went to the protest, and in the protest, you see the same young people. They're young, they're 16, 17 years old, young people who are confused and angry about losing their friend. And you see police officers, and then you go in social media and see in TV an article, and you see what I felt is a disconnect between what the community feels, what we experience, between what people see in their screen, what they see. And I felt like those young people protesting there felt their voices not being heard. Like they are pain, they're suffering, and their voice is not being heard. And people on the other side don't understand what they are trying to say. They just say they see violence, they see protest, and that's what they focus on, rather than asking themselves what will bring people to that point, what will bring young people to go and protest and do like act this way. And the media was in some way cooperating with this narrative, just showing one side and one understanding of what happened. And I went back to my aunt's house and I said, like, what can we do? We need to do something. And we understood that I always say that there's a lot of different ways to protest. They're protesting by going to high position, being a representative to being as an example, and going to a high position in work and government. And there's protesting of going out to the street and holding a sign and saying your mind. And they're protesting by education. And this is my world, and this is what I believe. And I believe that by educating people, bringing closer to each other, we're able to make a change. And that's why we decided to open the Heritage Center. And the Heritage Center comes from a place of strength and power, not presenting a sad story, but presenting our history, our heritage, a community that was disconnected for over 3,000 years, but still being able to preserve their Jewish identity. When talking about leadership and heroes and Zionism, which things that we learn in the Israeli school system, but the heroes that people see are not the heroes of my community. They don't have the same. And when I grew up being in a history class, I never saw someone that looked like me in my textbook. So when we built the center, we put a portrait room with leaders of our community, leaders that we talk about leadership and strength and all of those very important skills. We're talking from the point of view of the Ethiopian Jewish community, from their point of view. And we opened in last December. We were operating for 3 months, and it was amazing. We saw people from all over the world. We had group after group. Every group is like at least 30 to 40 people, and you tell a different story. And what I love the most is you have Israelis that live their entire life in Israel, like all of their life. They come to me at the end of the lecture, 28 years old, and he says like, listen, I'm embarrassed to know that I didn't know anything about what you've gone through. I'm embarrassed to know that I didn't know anything about your culture. And they have this like click in their head. They understand what we had to go through in order to be here. They have the respect of that, and they understand our challenges. Because as Pnina said, very, very importantly, the community is a very small community. It's 2% in the entire Israeli community. So a lot of people, like for me, and I'm sure for Pnina, I was the first Ethiopian that you met. If it's going to be in almost every job that I had, every structure, I would be the only Ethiopian in the room and the only Ethiopian, or the first Ethiopian they meet. So a lot of Israelis don't have this day-to-day interaction. So everything that they knew about my community comes from the media. And we know the media sensationalize everything and tell like this story in order to sell their, the newspaper, but they don't want to tell the full story. They don't tell the story of the people. And once you get in the room and you hear with people and you give them the opportunity to ask questions, and like the most, I never get offended from any question because I believe that once someone asks me a question and I'm answering, I'm giving him, he is less ignorant. I'm able to give him a tool that he didn't have before. And that's what we're trying to build with the center. And I know I'm young, but it's like, this is like my life work and something that I'm very, very proud of. Due to COVID, we are very struggling right now, but I'm an optimistic person by nature, and I'm sure that we are able to overcome all this also.
Thanks a lot, Ashager. I would have a lot of more questions. One of them, and maybe we can come back to that when you also answer the others, would be the relationship of Ethiopian Jews to non-Jewish African refugees. We had a big conference on this topic at AU last year. Maybe keep this in mind, but we have a lot of questions from our audience. I'm afraid we can't bring them all, but Laura, would you?
Yes, actually, I'm going to start with a question from a junior at American University who asked the question that others are hinting at, and we love our students and how perceptive their questions are. So Trevor Burton asks, thank you all for the great discussion. I was wondering how perceptions vary across different Israeli groups, particularly the different Jewish groups like Abkhazian, for example. Has there been more solidarity in recent decades for similar goals? What are some sources of friction or disconnect? Others ask similar questions, particularly about the relationship with Arab society, and others have asked kind of an overarching question about the Black Lives Matter movement in Israel, and can we explain the history of the Black Lives movement in Israel? Has there been a difference in the goals of that movement in Israel under liberal governments compared to today? So we could start with Trevor's question about the relationship with different Israeli groups.
So let me just make sure that I understood correctly, because I'm not sure that I did. Was the question what's the relationships between Black people in Israel, whether Jews or non-Jews, with the Arab community, in Israel?
So I'm actually Trevor. Trevor, can you speak? We can hear you. He's asking of the perceptions across different Israeli groups and perhaps solidarity with the Ethiopian-Israeli community.
Yeah,
So
sorry about that. I'm less familiar with this topic than I would like, and I accidentally named a group that I didn't intend. I was kind of just curious, like how these perceptions vary across different sects of society, from Sephardic Jews and others, and like maybe certain groups you find more common ground with, and similar narratives. And I was just wondering, like, has there been more solidarity between Black Jews, non-Jews, and like what sort of compromises have there been in recent years, or expressions of solidarity? If that.
See, so let me just jump in and give, just as I tried to in the previous round, to give some background to which then I'm sure Pnina and Ashager can put more of their own experience as Ethiopian people. I'd say that Ethiopian Jews were not the first Jewish community to speak in terms of blackness and identify with or as Black people. Let me just remind, you may have heard about the Israeli Black Panther movement that was formed in the very early 70s by people of Mizrahi background. Mizrahi is a term stands for Jews who originated from the Muslim countries in the Middle East and North Africa, who found themselves soon after arrival in Israel in the lower strata of the Jewish population in Israel. And this was the first, well, it was not the first, even in the late 50s, there was already demonstration, then called riots, that arise from the neighborhoods of Mizrahi people who spoke of this, about themselves in terms of Blacks or Black-like community. So today, and there is a fascinating chapter included in the book that I'm editing now that will see light very soon, from an Israeli scholar from the Department of Education at the University of Haifa, who studied the relationship between young teenagers of Mizrahi background and Ethiopian background in a boarding school. And the title of this chapter is "I Am Blacker Than You." Now, what's interesting about this is that the arrival of Ethiopian people to Israel put blackness that was already implemented in the Israeli discourse into new proportion, so to speak, that, and throw blackness into a contested argument. Who is the real Black? Who is blacker than who? And what we can learn from this kind of discourse is that blackness, whatever it may mean, can be at least be understood as a signifier of marginality, okay, and disempowerment. And today we can definitely see this kind of contested argument between different people, which being attributed with blackness or attribute sense of blackness to themselves, not only to signify their marginal position within the Israeli society, but also to empower themselves, to say, hey, we are Black and proud about it, okay? And it's not a coincidence that I use this Black and proud, a strong slogan from the days of Black Power, the American Black Power era, because this terminology and bank of images is still very strongly appear in Israel, and people do apply to it in order to represent themselves as sort of Israeli Black people.
So I just want to add to that, lately we'll see more ally from different groups that will stand next to the Ethiopian community through protest, especially with the late event that Ashager mentioned with Salman Teka, which, for me, being in all the protests we had in our community since 1996, so many we went through, that was the one that I felt there was more people outside from the community joining us. And I think it's because this protest was led by the young generation, not our parent generation and not my generation that came to here as a kids, but it's generation that born in Israel, and and their close friends are just Israelis, they're not from the Ethiopian community, and they can just grab them and say, you know, it really hurts me. It's really matter for me, and it's matter for them. And also lately, I saw one tweet about it that also the Arab population that also face police profiling in Israel, they feel solidarity with us, and they will be a good ally, and they would like to be an ally, but specifically to just stick with the institution and just stick about police profiling. But I have to say also that there is an argument in the community about, how, if we can be in solidarity with other Black groups in Israel that are not Jewish. And, this is something that we don't like to talk about outside of the community, but it exists. There is a discussion that some of us will feel comfortable to be an ally in solidarity with other Black groups in Israel, because the color, because the race, because we face the same challenge because of those reasons. And some people will say it's not the same. We here not because we're Black, we not belong to it's not the same story. We Jewish people, we belong to the Jewish people. Don't talk about color. That's not the first identity. That's not the main identity. The main identity is being Jewish, and that's why it's not related to us. And that's why, those that are refugee, they are poor, miserable. I feel sorry for them, but it's not the same story. And we should not mix them, because it may confuse the Israel society around us, and they question us again if we're Jewish or not. So there is a debate about it in Israel, which I think it's very important, but it's not out there. I mean, people outside of the community doesn't discuss it, doesn't talk about it, but it exists. And I think it's amazing, because now, with everything going on the stage, it's raising again those conversations around belonging. Are we belonging to the same group of people because belonging of race, because belonging to a nation? And I think here, the differences between Israel and the United States of what happening with races, it's huge, because the history of the United States is different regarding to Black people, and the history for us, it's different because Israel is, by nation, by religious, as a Jewish democratic state. So I feel it's like even more complicated to be a Black person in Israel, right? Because of those variety of identity. And in the other hand, I don't feel like we have the right language yet. We don't have the words, the definition, the language that have already been created in the States for the last 20 years about color and skin and, racial identity. We don't have those conversations in Israel. And I feel like many times my white colleagues or my friends outside of the community doesn't even feel comfortable to talk with me about race. It's like they put it aside and say, it's not the same thing. We don't talk here about race. We're talking about being part of the Jewish people.
So Michelle Levine asks, Ashager and Pnina, do you experience the sense of exhaustion that so many people of color here in the US feel by white people's ignorance and microaggressions?
Okay.
And several people, and relating to your prior comments, several people have asked about what the school system might be teaching about the history of Ethiopian Israelis, and also have television shows featured Ethiopian Israelis. And if so, have they helped?
So really widely more about and then I will pass to Ashager. I see she want to say something. But for the first questions, I said yes, but Ken, I feel like many times it's no one gonna ask Uri, for example, to prove how he's Jewish, right? No one gonna step on him when you walk on the street and say, oh, so how did you find out that you're Jewish, or how you belong to the Jewish people? And I think like that's related to what I said before, that it's more complicated here when we're part of the Jewish people and we here because we are Jewish. It's not because someone saved us, it's because we wanted to be here. And sometimes I feel like, I'm tired to explain why I'm part of the Jewish people, or why I need to prove my identity, and why I need to prove that I can be in the same level of other, if you look at the professional or the personal level, because people still, unfortunately, and not institution, people, a lot of people have ignorance about how a Black person act, behave, look like, and what the set of values he have. And I just want to say, just see me as I am. I'm exactly like you. I have almost the same value, I hope so, that we share here. And don't judge me by the skin color, because it's really tiring. And the other thing, and other part of it that it's really tiring, it's that many times I feel that I have this burden of the entire community. If I do something for bad or for good, it's ki'ilo, it's like reflecting the entire community. And if something happened in the community, if a husband murdered a wife, so people in my office will ask me, what happened in your community? Why husbands are murdering wife? Am I supposed to be a spokesman of my own entire community? I don't think that Uri is a spokesman of all the white people in Israel, right? So I feel that's also tiring. Like, why I need to be always the representative of the community when something happened, for good and for bad.
I think both of the questions connect because it's symbolize a lot of ignorance, and the ignorance come from not knowing and knowing only one person who is Ethiopian in your social group, in your social circle. And about the education system in generally, I think like also in the Jewish world, when we talk about Jewish studies and we learn about Jewish history, everything is Ashkenazi centric. The history, the definition, what we consider as Zionists, as heroes, the leaders of Zionist movement, everything is direct on the Ashkenazi centric idea of history. And everything else, it's sideline. It's something that you may learn about, like when you ask like random Israeli, what do you know about the Ethiopian Jewish community in Israel? Most of them will say Operation Moses, Operation Solomon, and that's it. Maybe they know the dates, maybe they know the numbers, but this is their understanding of the entire 4,000 years of history of a peoplehood. That is what is going on. And that goes across to all the culture. And what happens when only 2% of the society, and most of Ethiopian Jews live in like the south country, like south cities and like highly populated Ethiopian areas. They are not integrated to like the entire community, so most people don't get to know Ethiopians before they come to the military. This is the first time they see Ethiopian, and this is the first time they have connections. So everything that the idea of what Ethiopian is will be according to what the media tells you. And when you look about what the media talk, when you talk about Ethiopian Jews, they're talking about protesting, racism, and that's it. This is our identity, racism and protesting. They don't have any understanding of higher understanding of, and also, sorry, the second one will be tokenism. What is tokenism? This Ethiopian was successful of reaching something that every other Israeli was able to reach, but because he's Ethiopian, we're going to put him in like in the front page of the newspaper. And what this creates in the society, my understanding is that Ethiopians are always suffering from racism, and they are not capable as everyone else, because every time they are doing something that is great, we need to put them on the front line of the newspaper. And if you don't have any other experience of Ethiopian, that's what you will think. Especially in the last protest, I had so many discussions with my friends, and at the end of the discussion, they said like, Ashager, I'm so grateful that I have you, because I would never understand the background of the incidents that lead to this moment if I didn't have you. And that's what happened, and that's what creates when you talk about racism, not institutionalized, but by the people, is because the people don't have any other narrative. They have one narrative. And again, the cultural center, that's like, this is the reason we wanted to open it, to create another narrative, to create another space where people can come and ask, no matter where you come from, you are able to open a conversation about those issues.
So I want to thank you. I see Pnina's answering some of your questions in the chat. We have so many, we obviously can't get to all of them. Some people asked about Bibi Netanyahu's promise to bring other Ethiopian Jews from Ethiopia and what is happening with that. I know we don't want to get too much into the issue of who is a Jew, but people here are aware that there are still self-proclaimed Jews waiting in Ethiopia, and there have been promises over years to bring them to Israel.
That's a totally question for me. Since I'm dealing with that through my professional role right now, we are in a long conversation with the government in regards to the group that waiting in Ethiopia. And with the numbers right now is about 8,000 people waiting in Addis Ababa and Gondar for the last 20 years, at least, which is, I think it's not only difficult for them for waiting, but I think we're doing here a big mistake as a Jewish people. And now I'm talking on my behalf, not on behalf of the Jewish Agency, but my own behalf. We're doing a big mistake as a Jewish people before we determine who's Jewish or not bringing that group, because there was a mistake back then in the 19th when we broke the Salmon operation, and a small group stayed behind because no one could determine if they're part of Beta Israel, if they Shpala Shmura, if they convert to Christianity, and when. Well, in the same time, since then, for the last 20 years, this group practicing Jewish life more than I do. You know, they're very Orthodox. They go to services in the synagogue. They do everything. They speak Hebrew fluently. And, you know, and many delegations from the government been there, visit them, and it's clear. And it's clear that in the end of the day, even if they convert to Christianity, you know, and they now coming back to the Jewish people, they're returning to Jewish people, there is even a הלכה שאומרת that say that, you know, יהודי שעבד וחזר לישראל הוא יהודי, like a Jew that left Israel, but he is back, ushav, is returned to the Jewish people, and he doesn't hold any other religion, he's a Jew. So there's no problem with that, okay? Just to cover the Jewish part of it. The problem is political problem, that there is a group in Israel, the ultra-Orthodox parties, that do not believe that they are Jewish. So right now they're not eligible to come to Israel through the law of return, like every other Jew out of Israel. They come into Israel by the law of entrance, which only the interior office can determine who's coming or not by interview. So that's create even a bigger, complicated difficulties, because it's spread the time longer than what it should be. Right now, I can share with you that in communication with the government, hopefully in the next 2 weeks, they will have a resolution about it. The hope is that the new minister, Pnina Agenyahu, will lead a resolution that will bring 4,500 Ethiopians by the end of the year. And then next year, they remain Ethiopian Jews. And then in this period of time, we're going to complete the entire group coming to Israel. Yeah, hopefully, I hope it's going to happen. But you know how the politics in Israel is. So.
Yes, and thank you, Pnina. We screened last year a film called The Passengers about that subject. You're actually interviewed in the film. And I think you might be able to find it online. Several of you were asking about Ashager's organization, and I've put its website in the chat as well. Michael, did you want to ask any additional comments, or should we continue to take more questions?
I think we slowly have to wrap it up, but let's take a few more minutes. I see we still have over 100 people on here live, and with some good questions. I still would like to hear a little bit, and that was also in some of the questions, the relationship between the community of Ethiopian Jews to the non-Jewish African refugees who ended up in Israel. Maybe any of you want to say something on that?
I think Pnina touched a little bit about that, because the conversation is very complex inside the Ethiopian community. If you are in the circles of like social media, there's a lot of group of only Ethiopian Jews, and the subjects come across every couple of times where there's like an issue, and it's very divided because I think that the majority, and just like ground talking, not like number, the majority will say it has no connection to us. We are Jewish, first of all. Our parents died for the Jewish identity, fought to be here. Jewish identity is that everything that they have, and we should not look at ourselves as Black and just connect to those like people because the color of our skin. We need to connect according to our values and our identity, and that our identity is being Jewish before we're Black. But now I see there's like conversation, they're starting to talk about the intersectionality on this idea of the fact that they are suffering from racism and we suffering from racism, and what is the urgent of that. But this is a very small minority that are trying to convey that. I think that the majority will always fall back to the idea of our identity is Jewish first and Black second. On my own personal experience, I would say with the center we have Ethiopian restaurant, and one of our greatest employee, Gary, is from Eritrea, and he is one of his close friend, and he's a family, and he comes to Shabbat dinners, and it's all about personal connection. So for me, I see the struggle, I understand the idea, and I feel connected to that because I have the personal connection with a couple of people from the refugee community. And I think a lot of Ethiopians just don't have personal connection. And that's why it's very easy for them to isolate themselves and see them as their struggle is not the same struggle that we have.
Yeah,
actually, if I can add one other group, because I know we don't have a lot of time to cover all that, but I wonder maybe Uri, especially as somebody who's done the research on the older groups in Israel. Another group we didn't really talk about are Black Hebrews from the United States who came to Israel already in the 1960s, actually, and often are still kind of outcast in Israel. I think we're seen as such. I don't know if Uri or somebody else want to say a word about it.
So, can you hear me?
A little louder.
Yeah, can you hear me now? So the Black Hebrews, or the full name, the African Hebrew Israelite community, was one of the offshoots of the Black Power movement. Was formed in Chicago and first arrived in Israel in the 60s. Well, they perceived themselves as part of the ancient Israelite people, and therefore their journey to Israel was framed as a homecoming, as an exodus to Israel, and therefore was understood as re-experience of the ancient exodus from Egypt. Since they were not acknowledged as Jews in Israel and rejected the options suggested to them by the state to convert themselves to Judaism, what they offered was something that other scholars called soul citizenship, which means to create a kind of affiliation or alliance with the Jewish people and the state based on a shared perceived historical experience of victimhood, and therefore by their place, so to speak, in Israel, based on this kind of affiliation or identification with the Jewish people. And it's interesting to say that many asylum seekers today are doing the same, not because they read history or are necessarily familiar with the Black Hebrews story, but once again, from I'd say intuitive way to gain more points among the Israeli population. So we can see that many of them celebrate the Seder Pesach, the Passover meal, and telling the story of the Exodus, because in many ways, and much more than the Black Hebrews story, they actually repeated, or at least that's what they try to feature or to tease out. We did the same journey. We came to Egypt. We walked by foot through the Sinai desert in order to come to the land of milk and honey. And since we follow the same footsteps as you did, they then by appropriating the Jewish national seminal story, they try to again gain some support and earn some points from by the side of the Jewish population in Israel.
There's a scholar, Sandra Gilman, is asking a question. Pnina, you noted that when you came to Israel, you saw all the people as white, yet the Israelis you saw thought of themselves as divided not only by color, but by caste, Europeans versus Arab Jews. Did you see this difference? And I remember that myself from going there, and I think now comments have been made about it's hard to tell now the difference between an Ashkenazi and a Sephardic Jew because they've all intermarried. So there's one last question I wanted to mention is what is the experience of intermarriage with the Ethiopian-Israeli community and the rest of society?
So first of all, I think I answer back, but I will say it loud now to all. At least for me, when I came to Israel as a child, I didn't see any different. I mean, I didn't see different between Ashkenazi and Mizrahi. It took me a while to understand different sense and also to understand the history behind it, especially when I went to Ulpana for girls, a boarding school for Orthodox girls. And, you know, and my Yemeni friends will keep saying that they would never marry Ashkenazi boys, you know, when you talk about, as a teenager, when you talk about the marriage and stuff, and how it's important to keep their tradition and culture. And very similar to what Uri explained before about the Black Panthers. They came from, you know, the back with families that their parents fought as the Black Panthers and took part of those protests. So I felt many times during my teenagers period of time more close to, let's say, the Mizrahi Jews, because we shared a lot of kind of the same background of struggle in that sense, okay? But as I grow, you know, and you understand the history, it's different and it's complicated. And I have friends from all over and I understand that. But I think even for our parents, the older one, that they came to Israel, it took them a while, but today they totally get it. They understand exactly that, you know, Israel is very diverse. There's so many different types of Jewish people in Israel, and every Jew judging other Jew for their background. Now, regard to intermarriages, I'm the only one that married to Ethiopian in my family, by the way. My older sister live in Harrisburg, married to African American. My younger sister married to Russian. Many of my cousins are married to Russian, Moroccan, German Jews. So it exists, but what I noticed, I didn't do my research on it, but I may gonna do it in the future. What I noticed that it's more Ethiopian women marry outside than Ethiopian male. And I feel like it's also related to our culture. I think that women are more open-minded to marry outside of the community. They're looking for a different concept of a male. The Ethiopian culture is very patriarchal state of family. You know, the man rules, the man is like the head of the house, at least in Ethiopia. Some of it is still with us here in Israel. And I think for the Ethiopian man, it's actually more challenging to marry outside of the community. They will prefer the image they see at home as a mother, as an Ethiopian wife, you know, the one who will support him, that he go in and work. But I think it's with the next generation, with the young generation, it changed a lot. With our generation and our parents' generation, it's still like that. Like, at least the parents, it's still like that. I can tell you, like, from my own personal story, I'm really, you know me, Laura, I travel a lot. Even before the shlichut, I travel a lot, and I work 24 hours a day almost. And when I got married, my mom, like, the one of the things she told me is, you know, Pnina, now you need to find a different job, a job that will let you be at home and support your husband, and you need to cook and you need to clean for him. And I said, no, I didn't marry someone like that. I know he's an Ethiopian, but he knows exactly who he's married to. And actually, he's the one that's cooking and more with the kids, as now, you know, that's the time to be with the kids, and very supportive, and it's different. So it's changed with the generation. But I think the Ethiopian women more see that as an opportunity, because as more Ethiopian women see an opportunity being in the States, like in Israel, for schooling, for being successful, being progressive, and be more out there. Well, in Ethiopia, it wasn't like that.
Ashager, you want to say the last word?
So I have beautiful nieces. They are half Yemen, quarter Yemen, quarter Ashkenazi, and half Ethiopian, and they are beautiful. And when I see that, I see the next generation of they don't care when you ask them like Amber, what are you? She won't say I'm Ethiopian, Ashkenazi, or Yemen. She say I'm Israeli, because she doesn't see anything else. She doesn't know anything else. And I think this is what the progress that we see in our community and our society. I agree with Pnina, and is backed up by research that Ethiopian women are more open-minded and more integrated in the Israeli community, both like higher education. If we look on numbers of like higher education, going like schools, job, employment, all of those issues, Ethiopian women are leading the charge, and they are more open in and accepting of culture and understanding the opportunity that being in Israel and a modern country gives them, and they're able to take those opportunities. And I see those things as something that is positive and is a step forward for us as a community.
Thank you, Ashager, and thank you all, Pnina and Uri, and of course Laura, for making this all possible. I do remember when I lived in Israel a long time ago in the 80s, there were these tents out in front of the chief rabbinate protesting Ethiopian immigrants who had just come in. Now we are, 35 years later, and the problems are different. They've not gone away, just in this country as well. And I think, though, this was a really very, not just informative, but also a very inspiring discussion, which will lead us hopefully to get not just more information, but also to, for example, when you're in Israel, in Tel Aviv, go to, learn about Ethiopian culture at Ashager Center, and hopefully we'll read the book Uri's co-editing, which should be out by the end of the year, I hear. Then we can also read more about it. And Pnina, I very much hope we'll see you also back here in person in Washington. We have all these fond memories. So for all of you who joined the Center for Israel Studies at AU the first time, please sign up for more events. There is a lot more coming. We have a 6-part series on anti-Semitism after the Holocaust, which covers the history of anti-Semitism, but also the presence of anti-Semitism, also Israel-related. That will be next, starting September 10th, and many more events. Thank you all so much, and hope to see you soon again.
תודה רבה.
תודה רבה.
בבקשה. שלום.
שלום ולהתראות.
להתראות.